So despite being away from Vegas for 2 weeks, we're back already, only this time it's for vacation, not for any sort of WSOP adventures. And I brought Megan with me this time. As you guys can tell, we're not focused on poker at all, but instead on just having a good time here at the Resorts World Pool. Anyone who stays at a Vegas hotel, highly recommend coming to the pool. It's way more fun than any sort of tournament. But alas, this is a poker vlog, so I think today the plan is to head to Bally's, the King's Lounge, where they have cash game areas, and play some 10-25 no limit, see how it goes. But until then, we're gonna be right here enjoying the cold water and perhaps a beverage or two. What do you think? Anyway, you guys don't care about that. Let's fast forward to Bally's for some no limit Texas Hold'em. Alright guys, here we are back at Bally's playing some 10-25, luckily with a straddle on today, so 10-25-50. This game is uncapped, so I sat down with $45,000, somewhat of an odd amount, but here we are. And we're going to start the night off with some degenerate gambling when the player on my right asks if I'm willing to flip alone with him for his remaining $1,600 and some change. This means that he goes all in blind, I call, and everyone else folds. So we ask the rest of the table if they're okay with mucking their hand in the next shuffle. They all oblige, and so here we are starting off the night with a almost $3,300 pot, and I have no idea what I have. Flop comes out, Jack 10-3, turns a queen, rivers a deuce. I show the 7 of spades for my first card, not looking very good, especially when he shows the 9 of hearts. So we're going to need some help here, and we get a little bit of it, the 7 of clubs. So it turns out we actually have pocket 7s, but considering that he's showing the 9 of hearts, there's a ton of cards that can still beat me. However, the 5 of spades is not one of them, and what do you know, we end up starting off the night on a very good note as we win a random flip. So up a little bit now, but we're trying to play some normal poker, so that's what we're going to do in this next hand, where I look down at king, queen of diamonds in middle position. I raise it up to 150 and get called by the button and the big blind. So the 3 of us go to a flop, which is ace, queen, 6 with 1 diamond. Checks to me. I think you could go a few different ways here, but this time I decide to bet small. The button folds and the big blind calls. Turn is the 4 of hearts. This time when he checks, I just check it back with second pair. And we improve to 2 pair as the king of hearts comes out on the river. This time the big blind leads out for $300, which in and of itself I'm not a huge fan of, even if he did have a hand like top pair or 2 pair or whatever. But without getting too deep into those details, my hand is way too strong to just call, so I raise it up to $1,200. Sure, sometimes we'll be facing another raise or even get called by a better hand, but for the most part I think it's good enough to raise for value, so that's what I do. And sure enough, he ends up calling, and 2 pair is good, so off to a very good start here at Bally's. Moving on to the next one. In this one, the button limps in, and I look down at ace queen in the big blind. Strong enough to raise, I think, so I make it $200. The straddler folds, but the button calls. So 2 of us go into a flop, which comes ace, king, jack with a flush draw. I bet $150, and he calls. Turn is interesting. It's the queen of diamonds, giving me 2 pair, but now any 10 makes a straight. For that reason, I just check it this time. But he disagrees and bets out $500. Considering that he could still be bluffing with a bunch of stuff, I'm obviously not going anywhere, but for sure not feeling great about it. I put in the $500, and we see the 6 of clubs on the river. So now even some of those hands that were bluffing on the turn, like any club flush draw, improves to a flush. I check it again, hoping he checks back, and he does. When he does that, I think we're probably going to win the hand, and sure enough, I turn it over, and he mucks. In this next hand, for some unknown reason, the straddle is off. Shame on you, sir. But anyway, I look down at king 10 offsuit, raise it up to 75, and get called by both the small and big blinds. So 3 of us go into a flop of ace, jack 4 with 2 hearts. Action checks to me. I've got a heart, and it's a board that looks advantageous for me, so I bet $75. Small blind folds, but the big blind calls. The turn is the 7 of hearts. Big blind checks again, and now I think continuing to bet makes sense since I don't have a lot of showdown value, but I could have some strong stuff. So I put in $250, but once again the big blind remains unconvinced and calls. So looking for some help here on the river, and that's what we get. It's the 3 of hearts, improving me to a 10 high flush. Well, technically it's an ace high flush, but you guys know what I mean. Anyway, he checks it a third time, and I do think it's worth going for some thin value here. We could get called by smaller flushes or perhaps a non-believing ace, so I put in $400, but after thinking it over for a few minutes, he lets it go. Still nice to take it down. In the next one, there's a middle position open to 125, and I'm on the button with ace king. Finally some very good cards, so I kick it up to $500, and then it gets to the straddle, who decides to raise it again, making it $1,800. The initial raiser folds, and now it's back on me. This is the only other player at the table who has a pretty healthy stack. I think it's around $20,000 or $25,000. So considering that we're that deep, I think it's okay to re-raise again with some hands. Not always, but like I said, just because of how deep we are. So this time that's what I'm going to do with ace king by making it $4,000 to go in position. I definitely don't hate the idea of just calling, but this time I chose the more adventurous option. And so here we are. Now my opponent thinks it over for a long time and calls. So we've got a pretty big pot brewing already without even seeing a flop. Dealer puts out a really good one though. It's ace jack 4 rainbow. I flop top pair, always a welcome sight with ace king. So when he checks, I just continue with a small bet of $2,300. My opponent makes the call and we're off to a turn which comes the 5 of clubs. Shouldn't really change anything. I guess ace 5 suited does improve, but can't be scared of monsters under the bed. However, when he checks, I don't really see much merit to betting. It seems unlikely we're going to get called by a worse hand 3 times, or even twice for that matter. So I check it back, and we see an interesting card on the river. It's the ace of diamonds. I'm expecting him to check pretty much 100% of the time here, but I'm once again proven wrong, as I often am at the poker tables, when my opponent bets out $4,300, right around a quarter pot. I'm obviously not going to fold, so now we have a question between raising or just calling. Given the short amount of time I've been at the table, this particular player I'd noticed was playing very tight, so I immediately dismissed the idea that he's got a bluff. So that pretty much leaves value hands. I know it's a little bit insulting to say that, but that's just what I was thinking in the moment. And those value hands consist of ace king, ace queen, ace jack suited, maybe, but realistically probably not, and pocket jacks. Of all those hands, we're only beating ace queen, so I don't really know if there's a lot of value in raising, as ridiculous as it seems. And even if he does have a smaller ace, there's a chance he won't even call if I raise, so I don't know. After thinking it over for a minute, I decide to just call. I guess maybe a little worried that I'm hanging myself against a hand like pocket jacks. But after it's all said and done, my opponent flips over ace king. Chop it up. So after all those fireworks over nothing, pretty much, we move on to this hand where I open pocket sixes to 150, button calls, and then the small blind kicks it up to $800. He's got around $6,000 behind, so a little bit iffy as to whether or not I should call with this hand, but I do make the call and the button folds. Not the best hand to do it with, but hey, at least we have position, and we get a pretty good board. It's 10-8-5 rainbow. I guess it obviously could be better, but since there's no cards with letters on them out there, it seems like a good thing to me. So when he checks, I don't really think I want to bet this exact hand, so I check it back, and we see the 4 of clubs on the turn. He checks it a second time, which doesn't necessarily indicate he has nothing. I would assume this player knows that checking over pairs on a board like this makes sense, but at the same time, he could still have a lot of overcards that have a few chances to beat me. So I decide to bet small this time, $650, and after a few seconds, he makes the call. So I guess he was probably pot controlling with a hand like aces, kings, queens, etc. But what do you know, the river comes the 7 of spades. So out of nowhere, I make a straight with my pocket sixes. And now we have a dream situation on our hands as he checks for a third time. And I don't think he's going to fold if I bet really big, especially if he's got an overpair. He's probably just decided that he's gonna call any bet after playing his hand this way. So with that in mind, I throw out $4,000. My opponent doesn't even think too long about it before tossing in a call. I flip it over and we win. So kind of a weird hand, but I'm definitely not complaining as we take down a pot over $11,000 in size. So things are for sure trending in the right direction. And we're going to try to keep it going in this next hand where there's a cutoff straddle to $100. That's the player to the right of the button. I guess in this game you can straddle from anywhere. But anyway, all you need to know is that action starts to the left of that straddle, meaning in this hand, action starts on the button. Who folds, and then the small blind limps in. Now it's on me out of the blinds, and I look down at King Jack of Hearts. I raise it up to $400, and it folds all the way around to the small blind who originally limped in, and he tosses in the call. So a good situation here in position. And even better as we go to a flop of King 10-3 with one heart. Small blind checks. One of my cards matches the biggest card on the table, so I bet $300, and my opponent calls. The turn is not ideal, it's the ace of clubs, and I don't say that because I necessarily think he has one, but it just kind of defeats the purpose to betting now, so this time I check it back, and we go from bad to worse as the river is the 10 of spades. So if he called with a 10 on the flop, we're beat. If he called with any sort of ace high, like ace jack or maybe even ace queen on the flop, we're also beat by that hand. So with that in mind, when he bets $800, I'm definitely not loving this situation. At the same time, he only bet around half pot, which means I don't have to be right super often. Oh, I forgot to mention, I'm obviously also losing to Queen Jack, which was an open-ended straight draw on the flop. So yeah, like I said, plenty of hands that still beat me. But at the same time, I played my hand in a somewhat slow fashion by checking back the turn. I don't know, it's close, and you guys know the motto, when it's close and I'm getting a good price, I'm going to put in the money. This time is no different. And luckily it works out as my opponent turns over 7-6 of diamonds. Nice. Moving right along to this next hand. In this one, once again, the straddle is off, an absolute disgrace, and especially so when I look down at pocket jacks in late position. I make it $75, and then the small blind bumps it up to $200. Now it's back on me, and I think you could go either way between putting in another raise or just calling. This time I decide to call, and we go heads up to a flop of ace 9-4 with two hearts. Not ideal, as there's an overcard to my pair, but when he bets small, $125, I think it's a little bit too weak to fold right away, so I make the call, and we definitely don't improve as the King of Hearts comes out, so even more hands that beat me now. This time he checks though, I just check it back, not really interested in turning my particular hand into a bluff, and we see the 3 of diamonds on the river. Somewhat interestingly, my opponent now bets $1,200. Not entirely sure what this bet indicates, but like I said, not much decision to be had with my exact hand, pocket jacks without a heart, so I let it go right away. Moving right along, in this next one, we're playing against none other than Rampage Poker, who has joined us here, sitting on my direct left. I open up 5-4 of hearts in late position to 150, and he makes it $500 on the button. Now, we're both pretty deep, and I'm obviously not shying away from some action from my buddy here, so I make the call, going heads up out of position to a pretty good flop. It's King 8-3 with two hearts. I guess really it's not that amazing, but I do have a flush draw, and I'm happy to see he checks it back after I check it. So we're going to get a free turn card here, which is the 4 of diamonds, improving me to a pair. I decide to get a little spicy and bet out $50 for the LOLs, and my opponent calls. So we got some sweet Rampage dollars coming into this pot, and we're off to a river, which comes the Jack of diamonds. I see no reason not to continue betting against a player who's going to call me with anything, so I put in $150 this time, and after a few seconds of humming and hawing, he tosses in the call. I announce a pair of 4s, and we win. Yeah, guys, don't judge us too harshly. We butcher hands against each other all the time. I'm pretty sure in one of his vlogs, he bet with ace high as a bluff, and I called with a worse ace high, so yeah, the punts definitely go back and forth between us, but with that hand out of the way, we move right along to this next one where there's a small blind open to 175. Yes, that means the action folded all the way around to the small blind, and I'm in the big blind with pocket 6s. Think you can go either way here between calling or raising. The problem with calling is Ethan is going to be aware enough to take advantage of that and raise it up with a few different hands since, my dead money's in the pot. But I decide to call and just cross my fingers that that doesn't happen. And luckily he folds. So we're going to go heads up to a flop, obviously looking for a 6 here, but it's overkill. King 6-6. That's right, we flopped quads very unexpectedly, as is usually the case when you flop 4 of a kind. And even better news is that my opponent continues with a bet of $100. Now, this particular player is aware of who I am in terms of my YouTube channel. He knows that I bluff a lot and I try to take advantage of boards where I think I could try to scare other opponents sometimes, I guess. So with that in mind, I think raising it up right away is the best play. We're pretty deep and it's going to be hard to give me credit for anything that strong. So I make it $400 right off the bat. And I'm happy to see he makes the call, so it doesn't look like he was bluffing on the flop. Fingers crossed for a king or perhaps an ace, anything that could improve him. Unfortunately, it's the 7 of diamonds. However, if he's got a king, I still don't expect him to fold, so when he checks, I bet 1.5 times the size of the pot, $1,600. Now he goes in the tank. Thinking it over. He's got around $10,000 behind and decides to announce all in. Just kidding. I wish. He ends up folding and later told me he had king 9. So he pretty much owned me by folding that hand. Well played, sir. And with that, we move right along to another hand versus Ethan. He opens under the gun to $150 and action folds all the way to me in the straddle looking down at queen 10 of hearts. Certainly good enough to defend, so I toss in the money. And we go to a flop of ace 10 deuce with 1 heart. I check, he bets $300, and with middle pair, can't go anywhere just yet, so I make the call. And we see a pretty good turn card. It's the ace of hearts, improving me to a flush draw, and also making it a lot less likely that he's got an ace, so I'm definitely not going to fold now, but it looks like I won't have the chance because when I check, he checks it back. The river is once again pretty sweet. We're definitely getting smacked by the deck right now. It's the king of hearts, improving me to a very disguised flush. However, I don't think coming out with a bet makes a lot of sense. Seems to me like he's either got something pretty good at this point or he's just going to have nothing. So I think the best play is to check and go for a raise. And that's what I do. And luckily, he does put in some money and a pretty hefty bet as well. $1,000, right around the size of the pot. Now, of course, he could punish me if I decide to check raise, since he could have hands like ace-king or pocket aces. So it would suck if he was somehow betting, for example, a king, and then he decides to turn it into a bluff, putting me in a terrible spot after I raise myself. But we're just going to have to cross that bridge when we get there, and in all honesty, I think most players aren't really thinking of that, at least not very often, so I do go for the raise, making it $4,000 to go. My hand is just way too strong not to raise. And luckily, he instantly shows some frustration. So at that point, I think it's clear we've got the best hand, and he's not going to be raising. Now we just get to wait and see what Rampage wants to do. After a few moments, he shows me Queen Jack with a heart and folds. So a very nice play by him, rivering a straight, betting for value, and then folding to a re-raise. I gotta say, I don't know if I would have been capable of doing that, especially against someone who does bluff once in a while. Props to him, we don't get the extra 3,000. And with that, we move to the last hand of the night, where there's a late position open to $125. I call on the button with pocket fives, and we go heads up to a flop of Jack 8-8 with 2 clubs. My opponent checks, and considering that I have a pretty small pocket pair, I think betting makes more sense than with a hand like pocket nines or a jack, for example. So I do bet, but no need to go big here, only $75. My opponent quickly makes the call, and we're off to a turn which is the 7 of diamonds. This time when he checks, I just check it back. Not really sure about betting twice with my hand, but when the river comes to the 4 of hearts and he leads for $400, I just don't think this makes much sense at all. So I call pretty much right away, and we end up beating Queen 10 offsuit. So not a huge pot or anything. And right after that hand, the game ended up breaking, I think maybe 2 or 3 minutes after. So not the longest session ever, but as always, I do hope you guys enjoyed the hands. So it's actually the next day since that session, or wait, 2 days ago actually is when I played that. And as you guys could tell, it went really well. I was in for $45,000 and cashed out for a little over $60,000. Considering that this whole trip was just for fun, not really any sort of poker goals, I'm more than happy with it. We also got these sick matching shirts, courtesy of this one, thank you. As you guys can tell, we look great, we look like tourists. And yeah, the whole point of the trip was to just have a good time, enjoy the city, and not really do anything too serious, and that's exactly what I ended up doing. So all in all, this trip gets a 10 out of 10. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Sorry for the lack of WSOP content, but as you can tell by now, I don't really like those tournaments. So anyway, back to LA now. Probably gonna jump into some live streams or something like that pretty soon. So if you're into it, subscribe. Thanks for watching the video. If you give this video a thumbs up, I really appreciate it. And until next time, good luck at the tables. Say bye to Megan for now.